Reason and the barber's paradox. Reason, one would hope, always works. It seems to stand alone, like an island of certainty in the vast unknown and unconfirmed world that is knowledge. However, sometimes it seems that reason does not in fact work in real life, suggesting that we need something more than reason in order to understand the world around us. An example of this can be seen in the barber's paradox explained in the following video.
Oh, balls. The next paradox should be easier to explain. This one is called the barber's paradox. And this one basically goes on the parenthesis. Parenthesis. I don't know why I said that word. This one basically goes on that there's a town. So let's pretend you have a town. You have a town full of people, but only one barber. That one barber will shave all of the men except the men who shave themselves. So who shaves? So this rule becomes a fact. Everyone does this, and the rule is a perfect rule until you ask who shaves the barber. Because if the barber doesn't shave himself, then he has to abide by the rule and get shaved by the barber, who is thus himself, and thus he is shaving himself. But if he does shave himself, the other side of the rule, that means that the barber cannot shave him because he's doing it himself, but because he is the barber is shaving him, thus creating a paradox. Do you see the paradox?
So, the real question is, who shaves the barber? Now, this is a complicated paradox, so let's draw it out. First of all, we have a barber, and let us examine his options. If we look at the options, we see that this barber is the only one in town, and in this town, every man keeps himself clean-shaven and does so in one of two ways, either by shaving himself and going to the barber. Let's take a look at what happens if he shaves himself. Let's have the general hypothesis that he shaves himself. If the barber shaves himself, then according to the initial constraint given to us, the barber shaves everyone who does not shave himself, but no one else, then logically it follows the barber does not shave himself, which contradicts the general hypothesis. Let's try this again, but with the other way around. Let's have him go to the barber. The general idea is that he does not shave himself this time. If the barber doesn't shave himself, then the barber shaves everyone who does not shave himself. Logically, again, it follows the barber does in fact shave himself, which contradicts the general hypothesis. Here's a pictorial representation. We start with the barber asking himself if he shaves himself or not. If he does, then the barber shaves everyone who does not shave himself, but no one else. Logically, this means that he will not shave himself and contradicts the initial premises. If he doesn't shave himself, then he follows that the barber shaves everyone who does not shave himself, and it follows he will shave himself, again contradicting the first premises. Both results contradict their initial premise, so we have a paradox. This links to the way of knowing reason. An important concept within TOK's reason is reasoning, especially deductive reasoning, starting with a general hypothesis and applying it to a specific situation. Deductive reasoning is important and feels more certain than inductive, but reasoning itself feels more certain than other areas of knowledge. The barber's paradox is an example of when deductive reasoning does not work. No matter which general hypothesis one starts with, as in whether the barber shaves himself or not, one will always end up with a result that contradicts the initial hypothesis. If the barber shaves himself, he cannot. If he doesn't shave himself, he must. This is a potentially dangerous piece of knowledge. Much of our human knowledge is founded on deductive reasoning, and it is used in many of the areas of knowledge, including the human and natural sciences and mathematics. This raises the issue of how truthful a depiction of the real world our knowledge maps are if they are founded on imperfect reasoning. This artifact raises several potentially interesting knowledge questions, such as what is it about deductive reasoning that is so enticing and certain? How sure can we be of our knowledge that we've found based on reasoning? What are the real-world limitations of reasoning? What do we miss out on, and what is lost if we rely on the way of knowing reason? On the other hand, what is gained? Should we trust knowledge based solely on reason? And to what extent can reason help us understand reality in its true nature? Now, one might ask, why should I care? Reason impacts us all, just as this artifact does, because we all make decisions based on it. Also, it's important to know the potential inability to apply reason in real life. Finally, it's important to know that something is lost from a purely reasoning point of view. This piece of knowledge is an example of a logical paradox when reason cannot always be applied, especially not in the real world. It also shows us usefully that reason is limited and not entirely certain 100% of the time. The piece can be analyzed with language also to see how the phrasing and wording of the constraints, for example, affects the situation. So who really saves the barber? Well, it's an unanswerable question. Thank you for listening.